Definitely.
Yeah, I think even to be fair to Fr0zen, all the tournaments he's played in recently, he's performed extremely well in, and this is just yet another example, so it'll be really edging to take the first place.
Absolutely, and they're fighting for $8,000 on the line, but the game is starting. Have fun casting, guys.
Thanks, Nim. So it's going to be RDU, who has his mage band. What's he going to do?
He's going to try and lean on the Shaman to close out the series. We saw Fr0zen's lineup struggling a little bit against Shaman in the previous series, so who knows? He was able to eventually take down the Shaman with his own Shaman. Now his own Shaman's been banned out. RDU maybe picking up on the weaknesses of Fr0zen's lineup against Shaman, trying to just get the sweep right out the bat with Shaman, and it's kind of scary for Fr0zen, I think, dealing with aggressive Shaman as his Rogue falls to it very weak. His Yogg Druid isn't the greatest against Shaman, and Patron is just okay against Shaman as well.
Yeah, and we've seen it. One of the stories of the weekend overall, we've seen like the crazy decks come out, mainly Tempo Mage from RDU being a big one, but also just the fact that this aggro Shaman's been putting in some amazing work and just been like 3-0 in lineups, and even when it's not 3-0 in, it can grab 2 wins, which is pretty good, I've heard. So yeah, really good. RDU just going all in on that now and just saying, you know what, I'm just going to start with this deck, and as you said, try and punish Fr0zen's lineup overall.
Yeah. RDU has a really great Shaman start, but Fr0zen's got a really good Druid start. Having Living Roots and having Innervate are two of the most impactful, most important cards against any aggressive matchup, especially against Shaman. He just doesn't have a connection for that Innervate just yet. Picks up the Power of the Wild. It's an okay card. Usually you kind of want to be making the 3-2 Panther, but there is some possibility to buff both the 1-1s in and trade. I think the 3-2 is generally speaking a little bit stronger. Stat-wise, you put out a 3-2 and a 1-1, so then you're able to have trades into the Totem Golem and have a 1-1 remaining, so it's usually a little bit better on stats, but also allows your opponent to potentially get some Flame Juggler value.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes wider on the board, right? And Shaman doesn't really have a way to punish that well, and it just gives you more options overall, because the Totem Golem with the hand that Fr0zen has, you can deal with pretty swiftly by just going straight into the Druid of the Claws next turn.
Yeah. So I expect him to use Power of the Wild here and make a Panther. He's running through all of his options, taking his time, of course. It's really important to take all of your time, let the nerves settle in. You're in the finals, you've made it. Now don't screw it up.
Just win, that's all you've got to do. Come on. He does go for the Panther in the end.
Yeah.
And it's just going to go face. No point trading in there. He can trade in next turn and probably get rid of that Totem Golem.
Yeah, and if RDU comes out here with the Finley, which he most likely will, it makes a lot of sense to use your 3-4 to trade into the 3-2 to prevent the value trade on the Sir Finley Murgleton. So I expect we see that coming out this turn. Other than that, he's got to think about his future turns and how that lines up. Killing the 3-2 lowers his value of Argent Horse Rider, so that's something to also think about if he wants to be playing that the following turn.
Yeah, we can see even Argent Horse Rider potentially a little bit later on if he decides to go with a Feral Spirit. Argent Horse Rider Abusive Sergeant is a really good on-demand, high damage output to deal with some of these Druid minions that could come out.
For sure. And
just go with a Hunter Hero Power.
Yeah. Turns out Smorkin's pretty good in Smork Shaman, so yeah. I like the choice of going with the Hunter Hero Power. The other ones were a bit subpar. They didn't really accomplish anything in the immediate. You don't really want the Rogue Hero Power when you have the Doom Hammer in your hand, so it makes a lot of sense to me. He is just going to be protecting that Finley, of course. He wants to establish control of the board, and the best way to do so is make sure your opponent never has a value trade. Value trade being when they can trade their minion and still have it be alive.
Yeah, and then follow up with a good trade as well second time round. So as you can see, the Golem does die to a Living Roots, but that was going to happen anyway, right?
Yep, and we see Fr0zen go here with Taunt Mode instead of going for Charge Mode, Clear the Finley. Charge Mode, Clear the Finley leaves you too vulnerable to Lightning Bolt, Rock Biter. All those 3 damage removals that Shaman runs a lot of, so you can really respect the Druid of the Claw in Bear Mode here.
Do you think there's any value to go Abusive Sergeant Lightning Bolt to just insta-kill the Druid of the Claw with the trade from the Finley, or do you think you can just afford to play Feral Spirit here? And just just try and challenge the bear a little bit, as it will over time, trade into both spirits.
I guess. So the bear would trade into one of your 2/3s, leaving it at 4 health, and then you have the Abusive Sergeant and the Bolt you could play the following turn, and you could Abusive the other 2/3, Bolt the 4/4 bear, and trade in your Finley. So that's one road to take. Or you can go with, as you said, the Abusive this turn and the Bolt this turn, and develop nothing this turn, leave yourself with 3 mana the following turn. If your opponent doesn't have a 4-drop, that might be a little bit better of a line, but if they do have a 4-drop, you run into trouble as they then develop a 4-drop into your slightly weaker board overall. But you would preserve a 2/3.
Yeah, it really is just deciding, what are the odds on my opponent having, the 4-drop, because either plays, both plays are good, but it just all depends on your opponent's hand. So you just have to make the judgment call here, and that is going to be the Feral Spirit coming out.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I don't mind it at all. There's like so much risk in the other route with very like low potential for reward, right? So might as well just go with the safe line and have a decent board presence in the immediate. Fr0zen does pick up a removal spell to help him take care of one of these wolves. If he goes for it, he has to forgo with the Wild Growth. But I don't think you mind forgoing the Wild Growth this turn because you have the Druid of the Claw to play next turn anyway. So your curve's already working out without using the Wild Growth.
Yeah, at the moment, you gain nothing from that extra mana, right? So you may as well take the trades and go straight into Druid of the Claw, and then worst case scenario, have the Wild Growth for the following turn to just boost up to like 7 plus.
Yeah, and that 2/3 actually dying is pretty huge because it denies the value trade potentially on the 1/1, and it also denies the 2 damage from the Abusive Sergeant that could have been pushed this turn because it simply has no target to come down on this turn. So I expect we're going to see RDU hold on to it because having an Abusive just trade into a 1/1 route doesn't seem very good.
Especially when he has Argent Horse Rider in hand as well.
Yeah, that's a good point for sure. Those cards work pretty well together.
Yeah, so second Druid of the Claw is coming down, and the draw was a Power of the Wild again, so there's a chance he can actually just choose to buff his 2 minions here, but again, it's probably more likely he'll aim towards going for the Panther.
He's leaning towards finding a mulch off this Raven Idol, going for the
spell. For minion, hasn't he?
Did he go for minion?
I think he went for minion.
That's interesting, actually. Having a minion here could be beneficial. I was thinking more maybe the removal spell, but...
Yeah,
he did go for a spell, yeah.
Oh, and it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, it's up to a 6/8 now, so it doesn't die in the trade. He could buff it all the way up to a 7/9 and take care of it with one single trade, preserving his roots. Seems pretty sweet. He could also try and cycle the Wrath this turn just to try and find more options for the following turn. He's got to just imagine what is RDU's follow-up to this. How important is the Wrath for removal, or is it better to just cycle it this turn? Because Power of the Wild is one of the key cards in the Yogg Druid deck, as you do run 2 Violet Teachers, and it just works so well with that, as well as the Fandral. So there's many top decks that can make this Power of the Wild better. There's no top decks that make the Wrath better, but depending on your opponent's play, the Wrath could be a lot better. So you have to sit here and say, well, my opponent's overloaded for 2, he has 4 mana. Is he going to play something that I could potentially Wrath, like Tuskar Totemic, and those sort of things? So Fr0zen's just going to take the clean trade and make sure that he can use the Wrath defensively the following turn if he needs to.
Yeah, and, Profit Firebat here calling the Tuskar Totemic coming out. But it is obviously going to be the Horse Rider this turn for the really easy, clean kill onto the Druid of the Claw, and squeezing in the Ardent Squire there. So, he does challenge the Living Roots that's left as a little 2/2. A second Raven Idol now.
Yeah, man.
This is a tough one. Are you still going for a spell at this point from Raven Idol?
Most of the time you go for a spell simply because spells are just better than minions on average. Spell guarantees the fact that it's a class card. Class cards are better than neutral cards on average. And then spells are better than minions on average as well. So it's like a double better unless you're finding like a lot of minions that are specifically class minions. So most of the time you Raven Idol for spell. But I could understand possibly going for minion here since you have no minions in your hand. But I always prefer going for spell. It's just, you get better cards most of the time. Like, even if you have no minions to play, a lot of times some of the spells are really good. Like, Swipe's just absolutely insane, for example.
Yeah, and now he does have a minion at last, so he's got an Ancient of War, which is going to be pretty nice next turn, because the Shaman's put him under very, very little pressure this game, and it's looking a little bit rough for RDU at the moment. Does have Doomhammer and now Rockbiter, so does have a good amount of damage at least.
Sure, he's a bunch of damage, but no board. And the Shaman nowadays is so dependent on board most of the time. We even heard RDU in his interview talking about the importance of having board before playing Doomhammer. And he just feels like he's forced into a situation where he has to play Doomhammer without having the board. And he is able to squeeze in the hero power this way and start chipping away. He's got to be afraid of a potential Ancient of War coming down, but at least he can clear it with a Rockbiter if it comes down, and then also develop the board behind that. So it's not the worst case scenario for RDU. He just has to sink 10 damage into Ancient of War and potentially take 10 life away from himself as well.
Yeah, imagine if he didn't have the Ancient of War and there's the second Rockbiter. That would have been insane.
Yeah, that would have been 16 damage from hand, and having the Hunter hero power and being able to 16 your opponent in the face. Pretty good situation, but Ancient of War able to shut that down, and I fear RDU most likely has to take 10 damage here, double hitting into this Ancient of War to get through it. He just needs to set his minions in a position to do well, and Tuskar Totemic, though,
he's a cool guy.
He's a cool guy.
Sometimes he brings a friend, and it's Totem Golem.
It's a good friend to have.
Yeah, even though he does have to trade and take a hell of a lot of damage from this Ancient of War, as you said, it allowed him to build the board behind this play and potentially move forward. And because of the second Rockbite, he does have another 10 damage from hand if he wants to, combined with that Doomhammer. And he has like 2 really good minions. The difference between Totem Golem and just a normal Totem is actually pretty huge.
Yeah, and we aren't really sure the life total of Fr0zen. It's in the 20s.
Yep.
He may be at 20. If he's exactly at 20, then RDU has the potential ability to kill him next turn, as RDU has 10 damage with the Doomhammer Rockbiter, 6 on board, 2 from the Hero Power, and then another 2 with the Abusive Sergeant.
Yep, so still looking a little bit rough. I think Fr0zen's got a kind of awkward turn this turn, because if he can swipe the Totem Golem, Hero Power down, the Tuskar Totemic.
Then he develops nothing.
Yeah,
so I
exactly,
really am not
so
a fan of that line. Yeah, I think even if you go with the swipe this turn, you have to at least get the Fangel on board to try and contest something. It's just, he's going to go with the most aggressive line possible here. Just get the Emperor Fr0zen out, try and push for damage, get the Hero Power going to face, and try and kill him next turn. Saving the swipe for the damage allows a bunch of top decks for lethal, as he hasn't used a swipe this game. So there's 2 swipes for lethal, and he's used 1 Druid of the Claw or 2?
He used both. He had 2,
right? Both, yeah, I thought so as well. So he's only gotten 2 swipes remaining for lethal, because he also used the 3 mana, 4 attack, gain 8. Feral Rage.
Thank you, Lothar.
Thank you, Lothar.
Good he's here to save us there. But the Druid is on 23 as well. Obviously, there's a slight graphical bug. It looks kind of cool, but when it covers up the health, not too helpful at all.
The magical Druid power. It only happens when the Druid's playing Yogg Druid, you know? It never happens for Cthulhu Druid, so I'm pretty sure Yogg in the deck makes the Druid just, whoa.
It's just signaling, just you wait till Yogg comes out.
Yeah.
And Innovate, not too great at the moment.
He gets
Fr0zen
another
can
try.
draw, so Fr0zen can draw, which is going to be really important, and this draw could actually pretty much decide the game.
It could cause lethal to happen here. It could find Nourish, which could cause lethal to happen here, and allows him to play Fandral essentially for 1 mana, because the Nourish also gives you back 2 mana.
Yeah, and suddenly the Innovate's looking better and better as he can cycle and still have mana to innovate and do some crazy shenanigans. Oh, and there's the second swipe.
The second swipe. Yeah, so if he had not played the Fandral, he would have had 6 mana after the Nourish, or how much mana? No, the Nourish was costing 5, and he had 9 mana already, so he would have had 4 mana, and then the Innervate would be 6, so he couldn't quite double swipe. So that's why he went with the Fandral anyway, because it doesn't actually, he has no lethal outs after the draw 3.
Yeah.
So I like the play of developing the Fandral there and going for it. And that's it. He's only at 8 life, and so 2 Rockbiter hits, the Hero Power and the 2/2 to the face. RDU just barely able to take out Fr0zen's Yogg Druid.
Yeah, and Fr0zen probably pretty unhappy with the outcome as well, because it was looking pretty good early on. You know, RDU didn't get off to the fastest start as the Shaman, and when your opponents won the first game in Last Hero Standing with Shaman, you start to get a little bit afraid.
Especially how the last series went, and the Shaman was able to take down all of your decks except for your own Shaman, and now your Shaman's been banned. And Yogg Druid was probably one of his most favorable decks against Shaman. He still has... Oh, the Shaman wasn't banned.
No, the Warrior was banned.
The Warrior was banned. Okay, the thing was the other way in the beginning. Okay, cool. So now he has the Shaman again. So it worked out for him last time. He was able to win the Shaman Mirror, and that allowed him to win the series. And if he's unable to take the Shaman Mirror again this time, he only has Rogue to fall back on, and Rogue's hardest counter in pretty much the entire game of Hearthstone is probably Freeze Mage. But the second hardest counter is...
You were building up to that.
Yeah,
it's Freeze Mage.
Yeah. The second hardest counter is probably Shaman. So he could be put in a really tough spot. But judging by the opening hands, you got to start saying that Fr0zen has a bit of an edge currently. But RDU hasn't mulliganed yet.
Yeah, double Totem Golem is definitely a good start, and having the Argent Squire and on coin means you can put the Totem Golem out straight away, follow up with the Squire, and then go into the second Totem Golem, which is a super fast start. But if Fr0zen doesn't win, as you said, this mirror match, then it's going to look pretty horrible for him, as Rogue is not the deck you want to play against Shaman.
Even if he does win this match, I feel RDU is in a great spot in the series, because Fr0zen will be on the Shaman, RDU will lose his Shaman, then RDU will come out with the Zoo. The Zoo's extremely favored against Shaman, and then he has his more aggressive double Stranglethorn Tiger Hunter to fall back on with the Camels against the Rogue, which is slightly in favor of the Hunter, I'd say. So he's got himself a slight edge, but it's obviously anybody's game still. Like, a slight edge is not that big of a deal, and it's going to be really important on this game. Fr0zen opts to hold back Coin Totem Golem in the face of the Argent Squire and just develop his own Argent Squire. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I think seeing the Argent Squire down first, if your opponent has Rock Biter and you coin out Totem Golem, that's such a blowout turn that you're in a lot of trouble. And because he had the Squire anyway, and he can still sort of mirror his opponent, worst case scenario, I think it's okay. He's one step behind, but he does have the coin himself.
Yeah, and using the coin here, he's actually going to pull himself one step ahead.
Exactly.
Because now his Argent Squire is able to kill the 3/4, and he can coin out his own 3/4. And now RDU, of course, has the same exact play. We're watching a mirror match, so RDU just needs to find a 2-drop to really fill out his curve here. And Fr0zen already setting up for his second Totem Golem by following this curve instead of the coin Totem Golem curve, because otherwise his turn 3 would be a little bit awkward.
Yeah.
So I really like the play of how he addressed the 2 Totem Golem hand. A lot of people, the first instinct is coin Totem Golem, and that works if you go coin Totem Golem into 1-drop into 3-drop, but when you have Totem Golem, it's usually not the best way to follow the curve, so I like the way he did it there. These turns, by the way, these players are both playing in the very early stages of the game. Turns 1 through 3, most important turns in the entire Shaman Mirror match.
Yeah, exactly. You just see the impact of the Argent Squire going down first, which then just alters the game plan a lot of the time, because cards like Rock Biter, Lightning Bolts, and they just blow out your 2-drop, and then you've just overloaded, and they have a chance not to overload with Rock Biter, and then continue to build, which is exactly what we've seen so far. So,
and
as you said, this is really close, and we've seen multiple times this weekend. The first person who loses the board normally just loses the match.
Oh, yeah. Definitely the first person losing the board is likely to lose the match. RDU had the decision there of whether or not he wanted to overload. He chooses not to overload this turn so he can develop his 3-drop while also using a 1-drop removal, setting up to deal with his opponent's Totem Golem if another Totem Golem comes out. And we can say that it's very likely a Totem Golem comes out, as the way Fr0zen ordered his cards to set up to be able to play another 2-drop on this turn. So good play by RDU, identifying that that's when it's going to happen, and he's up a 2-1 on the board, which is super impactful.
Yeah, especially when his following turn could very well likely be the Feral Spirit and then the Flametongue Totem, as he can really just get the Flametongue Totem down, and then all of his minions start trading up.
He's overloaded for 1.
Oh, sorry, he's overloaded for 1. He used Lightning Bolt, right?
Yeah. See, he kind of has to overload himself and put himself in a bit of an awkward situation for the following turn just to be up a minion on the board, but it's super good being up a minion on the board. But seeing that 1/1 totem is the worst possible case for RDU, because he was assuming if a totem comes out, his 2/1 is going to be able to trade into the totem, and now it's a bit awkward. Otherwise, you would be able to Feral Spirits here, Lightning Bolt the Tunnel Trog, trade the 2/1 into any other totem, and start snowballing the game away. But that totem roll from Fr0zen is pretty impactful. I'm not going to say it's something that's going to win him the game, obviously, but at this stage, it's
definitely going to help.
Yeah, sure.
So do you think you go for Feral Spirit here, Lightning Bolt the Trog, and then just ignore the 1/1?
Oh, for sure, for sure. You could be afraid kind of a Flametongue, but if Flametongue comes down, it needs to be really paired with Argent Horse Rider to be too effective. So
you've already seen a Rock Biter as well, so even not super efficient, but the totem could kill off one of the Feral Spirits anyway.
Yeah. You're afraid of Abusive potentially killing one of the Feral Spirits. It is the extra safe play to make the trade, but at the end of the day, this is a matchup that revolves around racing and revolves around damage as well. So if you play around everything, and you're probably just going to get outvalued and end up playing around nothing, really. So yeah, I can understand the face attack there, but it would have worked out for him if he did make that trade, funny enough.
Yeah, as we do see the Lightning Bolt, Abusive Sergeant, and the follow-up from Thing from below. So just as quickly, you can just see each player doing everything they can to just build on the board. Yeah. And Tuskar Totemic is definitely a good card for that.
Yeah, even if it gets a totem, well, it needs basically to get a totem golem, because otherwise an unanswered Things from below is just so backbreakingly strong. And Fr0zen, fortunate enough to pick up that there, is in such a great spot. Now he has the Doomhammer, clean off both minions, maintain his board completely untouched, push 5 damage to the face. He's in a very good position to win this game. You have to imagine, as long as he doesn't do anything ridiculous here, he should be able to extend this current board position into a win.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with the follow-up for Tuskar Totemic to just go even wider. He might get one of the the top grade picks of the totems to just further build on this. But this is looking pretty horrible. There's Flametongue Totem and just a Tunnel Trog at the moment, which doesn't do much against a 5/5.
Yeah, I really like the way that both players honestly played this early game. Like, both players set up their curves perfectly with the overload. Both players set up to kill totem golems perfectly. They both followed the curves exceptionally well.
Yeah, and you just see the difference between drawing like Thing from below, Doomhammer versus
one
Trog.
drops. Yeah. So it can come down to that, and it is a mirror match overall. So eventually someone's going to stumble in their curve. Yeah. And even if you develop your board very, very solidly and you take very optimal lines, someone has to get the higher curve minions in the right time, and someone has to get the 1-drops. So. Yeah.
Looks like RDU's on the rough end of that stick there.
Yeah.
As, even now, Fr0zen gets a Flame Tongue Totem off, so he can push and clear even easier. And just push so much damage. That's 14 if he wants to ignore the totem. Sorry, that's 9 if he wants to ignore the totem this turn.
Yeah, never ignore the totems, man. Never ignore the totems.
Just kill everything.
Just kill everything. Just take all the trump traits. Look at how far ahead he is on board. If you just count like the mana stat-wise that he's ahead on board, it's just absolutely ridiculous. As long as he trades everything, there's absolutely no way he's going to lose this game. RDU realizing Fr0zen's not going to make a mistake. Let's quit wasting everybody's time. Stay focused in. Let's get into the next match.
Yeah, we've got stuff to do.
Yeah.
But no, this is like the aggro Shaman mirror is so interesting because there's literally no comeback mechanic, right? As soon as one person falls behind, that's it.
Well, yeah, there's no comeback mechanic, and each deck is built to snowball. Like, its entire purpose is, if I have board, I can win more. I have Flame Tongue Totems. I have, like, Doom Hammer that can allow me to trade, preserving my board so it can push more damage. They have just great removal kits in general out of the burn spells, and they have no way really to, so they have all the ways to, if they have the board, keep it, and none of the ways to, if they don't have the board, get it back.
To get it back,
that's what makes the matchup so awkward and so snowbally and seemingly so one-sided a lot of times to the person that gets a better opening. But the trick is figuring out how to play the opening absolutely perfectly, because the difference between it is like 1-1-1. And you can see lots of examples of that in like the difference between like a good shaman player and a bad shaman player, of how they follow their curve, how much time they think on the first 3 turns of the game, because that's going to decide everything in those mirrors. And this is one of those similar matchups also, just the zoo versus shaman. It's all about getting the board, all about denying the shaman the board in the early game, using your 1-drops to great effect, playing the correct 1-drops, and pulling out to an early lead because of that.
Yeah, RDU pretty much going by the book on the pick selection here. Is, you know, the zoo is the no, it's really difficult to talk about like hard counters at the moment in Hearthstone, but zoo is definitely one of the better decks you're going to play versus Shaman. Probably one of the best.
Definitely. If there was a deck that is called the hard counter to Shaman, it would be zoo.
Yeah, if you were going to go that far and name it, it would be zoo. And yeah, this is going to be really interesting as we see that it does have the Flame Imp start, and the Forbidden Ritual as well is going to be really important. As we were talking about, Aggro Shaman doesn't really have a way to deal with a board other than trading, and when you just create a ton of 1/1s, it can get pretty awkward pretty quickly.
Yeah. Fr0zen here doesn't have great ways to trade up in this Flame Imp. He doesn't want his minion to just die for free and allow the Flame Imp to kill the Tunnel Trog and his next minion, so he does have to use the Flame Tongue Totem here to buff it. And honestly, I think he's probably hoping for Tuskar Totemic to either get a Flame Tongue Totem or a Totem Golem here, and that's going to be what's carrying him in the game.
Any time you're not hoping for that?
Yeah, I guess.
Like, he's probably hoping Tuskar Totemic rolls really well.
Yeah, it's either Tuskar Totemic rolling, either the Totem Golem, Manatite Totem could be okay, Flame Tongue Totem pretty good, and Taunt Totem. So it's a 50-50 on Tuskar Totemic to be good with the Flame Tongue already on the board. Yeah. So you increase your odds a lot of finding success by like kind of tempoing out the Flame Tongue there. With the Abusive, he has some more options, but it's not great. So you do see him just snap play out that Tuskar Totemic, going for that 50-50. Doesn't quite get desirable results, but he still puts a lot of minions on the board to work in tandem with that Flame Tongue, and wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the top deck.
I know. So like the Alchemist is going to be insane here, just to clear up the Flame Tongue Totem and just cause general havoc overall. Yeah,
it's really good top deck. I'm surprised you weren't amazed by the top deck.
I was stunned in silence.
Stunned in silence. It's so good. Well, maybe he doesn't even play it this turn though, honestly. So, because the Imp Gang boss is also just so extremely powerful on the turn, but
I think the problem is you really do want to kill the Flame Tongue because that 3/1 is kind of awkward, and you want to guard your Councilman. So if you can actually just play the Alchemist, kill off the Totem, and then just use the Councilman to kill the 3/2, then suddenly the 1/1 Totem on its own doesn't really look too scary.
Yeah, there's also argument for just potentially throwing out the Imp Gang boss as well, as your opponent doesn't have great favorable trades against it, and just taking out the Tuskar Totemic this turn. And then there's arguments for like Forbidden Ritual, killing off the Flame Tongue, setting up so your opponent's minions don't do too much, because now the 1/1 is just a 1/1, not a 3/1 anymore, and your Councilman isn't directly challenged on the board. But it is so tempting right there to throw that Crazed Alchemist, and RDU realizing that there's going to be more totems, there's going to be more opportunities for this to get value, holding it back, playing the more mana-efficient play, and getting a lot more board control, getting wider on the board, knowing there's no Storm, and setting up to potentially get Gormok value or use other cards in the future.
Yeah, we see the Abusive Sander going to come down and be able to clear up that Councilman, as that is a threat even an Aggro Shaman can ignore, as that can get out of hand very, very quickly. Adder and Horse Rider just going to go face because the presumption is the Zoo is going to want to trade into these minions, and holding onto the shield there is going to be really important, as currently the board isn't really challenged by the 2/1/1s.
And even if Argus were to come down, which is the scary turn 4 play, Argus has no effect with the 2/1/1s. Sure, it lands on 2 targets, but you have 2 2/1s that they're trading into, so the Argus doesn't actually allow for value trades or any sort of buffed up trades. Then you think about the other 4 drops that can come out. Gormok doesn't work here. Dark Iron Dwarf doesn't allow any value trades. So there's absolutely no reason to trade into these 1/1s. So I really like the play by Fr0zen, realizing that and just getting that crucial bits of face damage, because a lot of times in this matchup specifically, it comes down to 2 or 3 points of damage at the end of the game.
Yeah, you normally try and play the match, so you want to try and control the board, but then also just know just as many turns as you need to actually finish the game up. And your opponent's definitely doing the same. And when you're against Aggro Shaman, it can get very, very tight when you're playing around things like Doomhammer, Rockfighter, and Lava Burst as well.
So the Imp Gang boss coming down now doesn't have a great way to fill out his curve here. Thinking about maybe going for the 2/2 drops to try and fill out his curve better, but I really like getting the Imp Gang boss down. Kind of surprised we didn't see it come down the previous turn. It's one of those cards that's an investment to play. When the turn it comes out on the board, it's only a 2/4. It's not very strong in stat-wise, but it quickly becomes a threat for your opponent. They have to deal with it pretty much immediately. Otherwise, the threat is it's spawning more minions, potentially activating juggles and getting down a lot of work. So we do see Fr0zen here respecting the threat of Imp Gang boss. It looks like going with the Flame Tongue Totem instead of the Flame Wreath Faceless here, just because you got to get rid of it. It's going to cause a lot of problems if you don't, and I really like that line of play.
Yeah, he can even fit in the Squire as well, so he can use his mana quite efficiently, and then he's not overloaded for next turn, so he has more options instead of just going into the Flame Wreath Faceless. But not that Flame Wreath Faceless is a particularly bad option to go into when you've got like a decent control of the board, at least for now.
Flame Imp is a pretty solid minion. Stone Toss Boar sometimes allows for some cute trades in the immediate. Where on the board would there be any cute trades? Because undoubtedly he's going to play Crazed Alchemist with whatever minion he plays this turn, so I don't feel like Boar does enough on the board. I'd like to see the Flame Imp being picked up here, the Crazed Alchemist coming down on the Flame Tongue Totem, 1/1 going into 2/1, 2/2 going into 0/2, and leaving the Shaman with just an Argent Squire.
Yeah, I mean, if he played the Boar, he could actually clear off everything but the Healing Totem.
Okay.
So
that is something to think about. For sure.
Because otherwise he's going to leave either the Squire up with a shield, or the Horse Rider, but obviously you just leave the Squire up.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see. They go for the Flame Imp. Yeah, I mean, this is still okay. You just leave the Squire up, and you've still got a wider board than your opponent. Do you ever take the shield off though?
It does threaten to potentially trade up, but the thing is, after it trades up, then you can trade in the 1/1 into it, right?
That's true.
It makes no difference either way.
Yeah, exactly.
So you just get to push 1 extra damage this way through this line of play. So I like going face with the Tentacle here, and we see Fr0zen committing to the 7/7, and this is when you just cross your fingers and hope there's no power overwhelming that lets your opponent kill your 6 mana investment for 1 mana and some teeny little creature.
Yeah, it's definitely the threat, especially because he's out of cards now. Fr0zen's got just working off the top, and he could very easily whiff if there's cards like anything like Doomhammer he's looking for to just start stacking up the damage, and maybe just dealing with the minions, because the way you beat Zoo is just don't let them have any board ever. But Gormok's also a pretty good way to deal with this 7/7, and this is looking like it's becoming very swiftly too much for the Shaman to deal with.
That top deck 1-drop there. Usually you don't want a 1-drop top deck on turn 6, but when you got Gormok the Impaler in your hand and another 1-drop and 2 minions on the board, that's when you want to top deck a 1-drop on turn 6.
Yeah, it worked out pretty well overall, and even the Taunt Totem going to be doing some work here, just to slow down Gormok a little bit. Does look like there's going to be the Doom Guard coming out, though, from RDU, so that's really nice drop. And the odds are he can probably play the minion he draws. Not if it's another Doom Guard, though.
Yeah, that is absolutely painful. It lowers the quality of his future top decks, and it kind of makes this turn a bit clunky. But all things considered,
RDU's in a pretty good
position. The only scary part of this position is when your opponent draws Doomhammer and starts, setting up lethal with the Doomhammer Rockbiter thing, making it so you have to question whether or not you can tap, and it starts becoming that whole race portion, which is where those chip damage in the early turns really start to affect your win rate a lot. A lot of the players that make extra trades in the early game will lose percentages on their outs for finding lethal at these stages of the game, and we saw Fr0zen was able to have like 2 spots where he pushed 2 extra damage where some players maybe wouldn't have been able to find those spots, and that could really end up working in his favor if he's able to pick up Doomhammer into Rockbiter and actually swing like some % chance to win the game.
Yeah, and the tap into Councilman then was really important. There's the 2 possessed villagers. We've got a whole little thing going on there. We've got the Councilman and the villagers, but just the 2 1/1s didn't look too great at that moment in time. But the Councilman really increasing the power of the turn. Doomguard still full health and able to put a lot of pressure on. So now there are 2 huge threats on the board for Zoo, and the Feral Spirit's can definitely help just fend off a little bit for a turn. But the health on these minions is the problem. Is the Feral Spirits won't be able to trade that well into them.
I don't think you take Flame Imp here. I think that's...
I'm really looking at Lepanome.
Yeah,
Even with its 1 damage, or 1 attack, should I say, the almost guaranteed 2 damage you're going to get, it's going to be worth quite a lot. As you said, the extra little points of damage just really speed up the clock on your opponent.
Whatever RDU does, he should be looking to try and set up lethal this turn. He's thinking whether or not he should tap, because you don't want to give your opponent the way to lethal you, and there's only a few ways that Fr0zen can lethal him over 2 turns. And the lethal over 2 turns combinations are top decking Lava Burst into Lava Burst, rolling Spell Power if RDU taps, or there's if RDU taps twice, there's Rock Biter into Doomhammer. So there's like 2 different combinations over 2 turns. So if RDU can set up a lethal for the following turn, there's not really much reason for him to tap, but he has to worry about also things like things from below or the second Feral Spirit stopping his lethal. And he's saying that he doesn't need any more cards to close out this game. He has lethal on the board. No matter what you draw, whether it be things from below or not, there's no way you can win this game.
Yeah, and also the interaction with the villagers there with the Councilman as well. Yeah, I'll just trade them in. Death Rattle +1 on the Councilman every time.
Yeah, absolutely loses no damage with the trades there, basically. So really efficient, really well played. And it's kind of the way RDU's lineup set up is what we see playing out. Is counterpick, 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 counterpick. And now we have Fr0zen coming in with the Rogue, which is his counterpick to Zoo. So Fr0zen slightly favored in this match, RDU slightly favored in the next match. Fr0zen needs to win 2 matchups, though, where RDU only needs to win 1. So you have to give the edge a little bit towards RDU.
Yeah, I mean, you just see that this. If you just got asked to go, how is this series going to play? Then this is exactly how it would
this
go.
is how
Each
I would
matchup
say.
has gone pretty much how we imagined it to go, and this is going to be one of the important ones. Since, as you said, RDU, if he manages to take the win here, that's going to be it for him, and he will be the champion. But Fr0zen has got the good side of the matchup overall in this specific game.
Especially with Edwin Van Cleef backstab in his hand already, just threatening to be able to make a 6/6 on turn 2 while removing his opponent's minion. Such a powerful start for Rogue. Rogue on the coin makes it a lot more favored than Rogue not on the coin in this matchup. So good on him managing able to get the coin up, increases his edge probably from like 55% favored up to like 62, 65, somewhere in that range.
I was super interested in what the second number you were going for there. 62. Go.
Yeah, I don't know.
Are you telling me you're just making these numbers up? Yes.
I don't know. It depends, like, exactly the lists, right? So it's really hard to say specifically. I don't know all 30 cards. Like, I was briefly able, given the deck archetypes, but it's much different than knowing all 30 cards in the list, right, which plays a factor. But I do know for certain Backstab Coin Edwin Van Cleef is really strong.
Yeah, it's a pretty good play. Especially when you're in Zoo, where they this early in the game, if they're committing like power overwhelming and stuff, then they're already gone for later on. It's obviously not great if your Edwin gets countered that hard, but at the moment with just the possessed villager down, there's not a lot you can really do about it.
Yeah, RDU may have seen Fr0zen keep a lot of cards, but usually players kind of wait till the mulligan, especially when they have big Edwin hands, because they don't want to reveal the fact that they have those sort of cards. We do see RDU run out with the Dark Peddler, so I have to imagine we see Backstab Coin Edwin come out here, and it's so strong, especially because Power Overwhelming doesn't kill it. Like, Power Overwhelming is only 5 attack for the Dark Peddler.
It just wouldn't be enough.
It's just...
Yeah, already just backstab, already over, coin, yep. Straight into the Van Cleef, and this is one of the power plays you do as Rogue in this matchup, and as you said, it's pretty difficult to deal with.
It's not easy, for sure. It's not easy. He would need Power Overwhelming plus Direwolf Alpha to kill it cleanly, or Power Overwhelming plus Abusive Sergeant, some sort of combination like that, and it's just something he simply doesn't have. So, as RDU, he's kind of desperate in this situation to try and figure out the best way to move forward from this situation. He has the Voidwalker, which could block it. He could go wide on the board, go Voidwalker, and then Possessed Villager, Abusive Sergeant, spread super wide on the board, try and bait a Fan of Knives. He could also potentially use the Abusive Sergeant and trade into the Edwin Van Cleef to attempt to Fan of Knives even more, so that Fr0zen needs to Fan of Knives to protect his Edwin, and then he can go with the Forbidden Ritual for 4 1/1s and hope to maybe find one more buff card, Direwolf Alpha, Abusive Sergeant, Dark Iron Dwarf, Defender of Argus, Power Overwhelming, Soulfire, you know, something like that, and then he's able to finish off the Edwin after that with having all of the access to the 1/1s since he baited out the fan.
Yeah, I really like playing the 1/1s here and just trading the abusive Possessed Villager into Edwin, because you put him at 3 health, which suddenly becomes a lot easier to deal with for the Zoo than 6.
Yeah, and it looks like that's the line we're seeing him take here. Just really hoping that he can make his opponent be like, all right, the only way I can defend my Edwin is Fan of Knives, and then play the Fan of Knives, and then just completely counter the Fan of Knives by playing the Forbidden Ritual. So I really like the line here by RDU. I think it's really smart.
Yeah, and also, like, if the Fan of Knives comes out, you know Edwin has to go into the 1/3 unless there's a second backstab that, you know, only on turn 3 here, second backstab or a prep, which, you know, is pretty unlikely this early in the game.
Very unlikely. So I have to imagine we see the Forbidden Ritual come out here unless something better arises. He does have the ability to Argus trade up, but that puts a 2/3 on the board, and that's extremely weak. I think you can afford taking 6 to the face to have a stronger board, so I'd really like to see Forbidden Ritual come out here.
Yeah, straight after the Fan of Knives. There's no safer turn to play it now, I don't think.
Yeah,
you just get them on the board and then build on it in the following turns.
Yeah, and the following turn, that's when you play the Argus and get those stronger minions in the field and have your board buffed up a lot. But he is just going to go immediately for the Defender of Argus. I guess he's afraid of the potential second fan. So, yeah, I guess he does get more 1/1s in the future with Forbidden Ritual. The longer you can hold on to the card, right, the more value it gets at later stages in the game, as long as there isn't a second fan.
Yeah. I think he also just really wants to get that Councilman down pretty quick as well. So if he's planning on going the Argus the following turn, then that delays the Councilman. And the longer that's delayed, that's the threat that the Rogue will need to deal with. And the longer the game goes on, the higher the odds that they've got the answer to that threat.
Okay. It's reasonable enough for sure. We see Fr0zen able to remove this Argus quite easily, but he does forgo developing the Violet Teacher to do so. Yeah, interesting enough there. I would have been honestly kind of tempted just to throw the Violet Teacher out there, even though it's such a great card at later stages of the game because you can play it with things like Sap and Eviscerate and whatnot to be able to generate value off of it.
Yeah, I think in this matchup, though, because you are against Zoo and all you want to do is keep the board down, the Violet Teacher would be one of the minions as a 3/5 that can start trading away in the following turns, as well as generate tokens if it survives.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the ones that's not easy to kill. Like, it definitely requires Power Overwhelming from most of the Zoo's minions to be able to trade up with it, but RDU has the most awkward set of cards here. He can either go for the Forbidden Ritual this turn, which I still like. You've seen the fan. I think you're at a bad spot. Let's risk it, but I'm more of a risky player than a lot of players would be.
Could also go for Councilman into Alchemist.
Well,
go for the Smoke Life.
Go for the 5 damage to face. Just get him with it.
Yeah, hey, it negates the deadly poison, right?
It does negate the deadly poison. Or you can order them the other way around.
That's no fun.
Yeah. Yeah, or you can, I guess, go for the tap and drop down the Councilman. It's less board presence in the immediate, but you do gain more resources, which are important. And he picks up a really key one, the Knife Juggler for the Forbidden Ritual. Able to get a lot of knives out, do a lot of damage with that.
Yeah, I think what this does is it just sets up a stronger next turn, right? You'd sort of take the hit this turn, just play the Councilman tap, and then build on to potentially just going either full Forbidden Ritual, but now we see the Juggler. It could well just be Juggler instead. Juggler and Ritual, of course.
Yeah, there's no better time really to play Ritual than when there's a Councilman and a Juggler on the field. You get a ridiculous amount of juggles, and you get a ridiculous buff to your Councilman, but I don't know if that's really the play here, just because the juggles aren't too high impact, because there's very low likelihood that you're going to juggle the Drake 4 times in a row. If you do, that's really good, but I think that's a little more risky than I do tend to like to see.
Yeah, his other options are, I mean, yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tough. His other options are
not great.
Tap, try and find something else to go on with here.
Yeah, the problem is if you tap, you can't do just like play onto, you know, like the Alchemist with that Juggler Alchemist and then the Possessed Villager, which just puts the most on the board if you're not going to Forbidden Ritual.
Sure.
So it's just kind of awkward. And then what you're going to tap into that really affects your ability to kill the Drake here. It's just going to Ritual and then trade, I guess.
Ritual and then trade. That's really scary
hope
against
the second Fan of Knives isn't there, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. He does get a lot of value out of this Ritual by holding on to it the way he did, just making sure he was able to connect it with either a Councilman or a Knife Juggler. So it ended up working out pretty good with him there, able to get this 5/1 Councilman and use it to trade up. And it knows it's very unlikely that there's a Fan of Knives since 1 has been used, so I can feel pretty comfortable with this play. And he's just been accumulating such a large hand size with all the taps he's been doing. It's interesting how slowly he's been playing the matchup. It's kind of, I guess, stylistic, or maybe signals about his deck a little bit that he's not running maybe Leroy or Soulfire is more the Doomguard version, a little bit slower, more control-y version of Zoo. Whereas a lot of players tend to favor being a lot more aggressive in this matchup, as being able to rush down the Rogue is usually one of the highest win rate ways for Zoo to do it.
Yeah, and what RD seems to be doing here is just favouring the retention of resources, right? He's just going to keep tapping, and what this does is, if there's, worst case scenario, second fan of knives, well, like next turn he has like Juggler, Villager, and the Imp Gang Boss as well. So, that's a pretty good like refill turn, even after a Forbidden Ritual's been played. We're going to see the sap on the Councilman.
Yeah, this Crazed Alchemist might be able to put in some work here, able to reduce the health of the Violet Teacher by 2, acting like, it's sort of a removal spell, kind of dealing 2 damage to the Violet Teacher if he wants to flip its stats around. Yeah,
and we see how pressured Fr0zen feels with that previous turn, and it's a little bit awkward. He actually put a deadly poison dagger into a 1/1, which never feels good.
Maybe afraid of the Gormok potentially, but your opponent can likely play Gormok with some of their minions. So I guess, what do you think he was really playing around there? Just trying to protect the teacher against some sort of removal spells?
Yeah, and I think one of the problems as well is the more he waits to use the dagger, then he can't re-dagger later to continue to get use out of it, and there weren't any big minions anywhere, so couldn't really get value, and the longer you wait, you're getting 0 value then, right? You just can't not attack him with a weapon at all, which isn't good versus Zoo. You really need to, just push on the ability that you can affect the board with your hero power.
Especially with all those 1/1s there and without a fan of knives, you really need to start figuring out some way to remove them, and dagger is a pretty good ability for killing the 1/1s, so yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Looks like he's going to follow up with a Falseer here. Just put 2 good minions on the board and heal for a little bit again. Just because of the pace in which RDU's decided to play this game, Fr0zen is now on 28 with that Falseer heal, so pretty comfortable on health. But RDU isn't at the point, even on turn 8, where he's like drawing a card into an empty hand and then tapping and hoping those 2 cards are good for the turn and then doing the same again. He's actually got a few cards to mess around with, and he continue to build on them next turn as well, as he's going to retain one of these 1/1s.
Yeah, his board is absolutely massive, and it's really interesting seeing like RDU play this matchup. A player that's like really experienced with Zoo, claims to be like a Zoo expert, plays tons of Zoo on stream, and you see him just, he reads his hand in the beginning and he starts tapping a lot and playing the game very slowly, and gets to this situation where Rogue's gonna have a really hard time removing all these minions actually, since they don't have Blade Flurry anymore. So I feel like his play style against Rogue's way different than a lot of other Zoos, and he's really, instead of rushing it down, he's just saying, yeah, I have really low-cost minions, but I can still get such great value out of them that I can exhaust your hand, and you don't have Blade Flurry to clean up how wide I can go on the board, and it looks like it's kind of working out for him.
Yeah, and also just like playing a tactic that most people just don't, can also just throw your opponent off. You're just not used to playing against someone who plays Zoo in a style like this, and we're seeing at the moment at least it's paying off for RDU.
Yeah, it might start turning around right now, though, because this is the trap you can run into if you play slow against Rogue. If you give them time to get gadgets and Auctioneer and some spells, especially a prep, it can get really awkward. I'd like to see Fr0zen maybe even go for the coin here as well. He could get the Tomb Pillager killed and get the coin and try and find a Conceal after cycling the Eviscerate and the Sap, but we do see him just go for the Sap on that minion. Eviscerate the 3/3 and trade into the Imp Gang Boss, I guess.
Yeah, I guess he's just taking what he can get here and doing as many trades as possible, and they're just drawing to Leroy as well. Not going to be too impactful at the moment, but he does have Cold Blood in hand, so there's a chance that he can burst out. He did get the coin though, so the thank you from RDU is it's kind of a bittersweet feeling of the Juggle did kill off the Tomb Pillager, but you also just enabled more gadgets and draw.
Yeah, it was interesting there. He could have potentially sapped the Imp Gang Boss, eviscerated the 3/3, traded the 5/4 into the Councilman to guarantee the coin and not have to worry about an extra 1/1. But this line of play works out too. It's quite similar, especially when the Juggle hits. Then it's really similar. But he's not in a terrific spot. He's not in a terrible spot. He has a bit of damage, but RDU's grip on the board is just so strong, and Fr0zen's running out of removal spells.
Yep.
He's used some saps, he's used some eviscerates, he's used a Fan of Knives, and it's going to be really tough for him to come back on this board.
Yeah, and these Juggles as well doing some work. He has trained this Knife Juggle well. Is it going to snipe the... Oh, okay, one off. But pretty well overall. He sniped the Tomb Pillager and then did some work on the gadgets, and so continue to enable RDU to actually keep hold of this huge board. And the 2 SI7 agents now are the cards Fr0zen probably wish he was having early on. Is they're pretty good versus Zoo normally.
Yeah, pretty good, yeah. Fr0zen did whiff on a lot of the early game draws, and RDU also whiffed on some of the early game draws, having a really slow and awkward start. And it's interesting to see when both decks have a pretty slow and awkward start, the Zeus ends up pulling up ahead, and it really is mainly, I think, because of the way RDU played this game.
That's going to be it.
Yeah, that's going to be it. He's going to take it. RDU is the champion on the back of his Zoo play, playing the matchup that is normally unfavored for the Zoo, but he played it in a really weird, unique way, and that's what able to lead him to a victory there.